Hey, welcome back. It's the Scaling Secrets podcast, and Greg Baker is here from Alumni Ventures. They're at av.vc. Alumni Ventures is a venture capital firm that provides accredited investors and institutions with access to professionally managed, diversified venture portfolios. Their network is among the largest and most well-connected in the industry. So we're going to find out from Greg Baker himself about how he's built and grown and helped all these amazing companies, what he's done that's unique, and so much more. So, Greg, glad to be speaking with you.
Hey, my pleasure.
All right. And, you're a podcaster like myself, and you're all about the, giving back and teaching people. And so what do you do to stand out with all the podcasts out there, all the venture capital firms out there, et cetera? What makes you unique and special?
I don't know that we're unique and special. I have this great role where I talk to people all day that are passionately trying to change the world. Entrepreneurs are, really, really engaging. They all have a very interesting story. So our podcast on our end is really just interviewing them and talking about, what drove them, what they're doing, and every time I end up at a party or something like that, people are always wanting to hear, what company are you talking to now? And I've invested in, as my colleague says, everything from dog houses to space stations. And I've invested in both of those ends and a lot of things in between. So there's usually something exciting, but I think that the founders are fascinating, and people tend to agree and listen in to the Tech Optimist podcast, which is the Alumni Ventures podcast.
Amazing. And there's something you mentioned there that's pretty cool, is this idea of the mix of the certainty and the uncertainty, right? Like you do all these things every day. You're going to have like a set process, whether it's with the companies you're helping or with the podcast format, but then the guests always change. And so you have the familiar and you have the kind of repeatable skill, but there's also something new. Like you say, you go to parties and people are like, hey, are you working on the space station company now, or the doghouse company? And so as far as like the specific companies, like what jumps out in particular? Like when you go to one of those parties, like what's an amazing story that comes to mind as far as just like one of these great companies that you've helped?
Well, I think almost every company that we invest in has some amazing story. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't have invested. It's kind of the trick when people are pitching to us. They need to stand out. I see the toughest part of my job is I see 100 companies a month and we'll invest in one or two. And that doesn't mean that the other 98, 99 are bad. They're just not right for us at this time. And it's tricky explaining to people that are passionate about what they're doing that it isn't quite right. But each one of them has something fascinating that they're doing. And just building our portfolio, making our investors, our goal is to raise money for our investors. The unfortunate part of this job is that the entrepreneurs are really our product. We love them all. We want them to do very well, but our customers are our investors, and we have to do what's right for them. So just got off the phone with someone who's got a very interesting project. It just doesn't fit what we invest in our venture capital world. It was more of a, I might do it myself, but it's not something that I would put my investors into. Little too off the beaten path for what we do.
Well, it sounds like dating, right? It sounds like you have these people with their companies and they put their best foot forward. They tell an interesting story, but then sometimes it's a numbers game. Sometimes it's luck. Sometimes it's good, but just like not with this investor. And so what do you wish these would-be investors knew going in? Like say that like they meet with you. Is there like a secret of the trade, or is there something that just you wish that they knew before meeting you?
Well, I'm a former founder, ran a startup for several years. And what I tend to tell people more often than anything else that pitched me is, do you really want venture capital? I think that 95% of companies shouldn't take venture capital. It's not the right way to fund every company. But many entrepreneurs, especially ones that are doing it the first time, think, okay, I got to this point. Now I go talk to venture capitalists. Well, venture capital is great for a lot of industries and a lot of businesses, but for most companies, there are other ways to grow. And once you take institutional money, you give up a big part of the trajectory of your company. For us to be successful, you need to be acquired or go public in the next 10 years. As you continue to grow, you need to keep your existing investors happy, because if we don't reinvest, it's really tough to convince other people that the company's doing well, because venture capitalists are at their core tend to be kind of greedy. So if the company's doing well, we're typically going to reinvest. And if a lot of your existing investors don't, so you lose a lot of control of your company. So I think that, you know, I wish more founders would realize they're better suited to just grow the company in other ways and stay away from. But that core of great companies that really need the connections, the expertise, and the accelerant that venture capital can be, yeah, that's the right one. And just because you're not a venture capital backed company does not mean you're a bad company. I think there are some very, very successful companies out there that just had there better ways to do it for them. And I wish more people would know that before they kind of get disappointed in the process.
Fair enough. So it's not for everyone, and it's not something that you necessarily have to have or pursue. And so, what's the process like? What are the steps? Like, if some company wants you to invest with them, like, how do they approach you? How do they meet with you? What's the timeline? What is this like?
Well, we are our fund. The investors are individuals, and due to the rules and requirements of venture capital funds or any funds under the SEC's purview, we're going to be a very small fund. So the funds that I run are around $5 million. The overall organization, Alumni Ventures, is about $200 million. I have access to most of that for really good deals, the right situation. But generally, I'm writing relatively small checks. So we specifically are follow-on investors. We're never the lead investor in a round. So we're happy to meet with entrepreneurs at any point if they've decided that venture capital is the right path for them. But we can't make a decision about investing until they've found that lead. So our process is very simple. We meet with the company. We ask a number of questions about where they're going, where they're heading. Really want to know a little bit about what makes their team tick and why they're doing what they're doing. Partially because most companies are not successful in what they originally start out in. So we need to know that the team is adaptive to what their customers are giving them as feedback. But then once the lead VC negotiates the terms of the deal with them, we take a look at that. We'll ask some follow-up questions, but most of our diligence we do outside of the company. I recognize that if I'm investing in that company, I want them spending more time working on their business than talking to me. So we'll do most of our work without trying to bother them too much. We typically can turn around a decision in 2 to 3 weeks, maybe 3 hours of their time total. And we'll write a check somewhere in the 5 to 10% of the round.
Well, cool. And so, you mentioned some of these things that you like to see, right? You do the due diligence. You mentioned things about adaptability. Like, what really excites you? Like, are you the kind of person that are you looking for like a good people, good team, like something proprietary, good product? Like, what just really energizes you and makes you say like, okay, this has potential?
Well, me personally, I'm a mechanical engineer from the Midwest. I like boring stuff. I like infrastructure. Um, we're looking at electrifying everything, which is great. Um, Unfortunately, we don't have enough power to um, put, load the batteries of all the cars. That if everyone had an electric car, our grid would fall apart. So we need to invest in better transmission lines, more storage, more renewable resources or possibly it's not electricity, maybe it's hydrogen. But the infrastructure of getting all of that to be used. We invested in a company that is involved in the business to business rebate and discount process, which is just a pain in everybody's day to day life. If you're in a large company, someone in purchasing is keeping track of, okay, what discount or rebate do we get? Well, there's a company that takes care of all of that. It just automatically happens, and they just take a little piece, and that it's very, very unexciting, but makes a lot of money because infrastructure is key. From our investment standpoint, we look at a lot of different factors. We're a little bit data geeks at heart, and we've analyzed a lot of deals that either we were in or not in, but we can get information about. And we looked at a number of different factors of that you could possibly get in the deal. And we found that there are certain things that are relevant and certain things that aren't, but really kind of comes down to four main categories. Um, what's the structure of the deal? Does it make sense? Is the valuation proper for where the company's going? Are they raising enough money to make it through to their next milestones? They're not raising too much money, so they buy expensive things for the office. Then, what's the team that's investing? What's their track record investing in this industry at this stage? And a lot of that is really to look at what is this team able to attract. Both, we also look at the team. Are they able to bring in people that really are A plus players, both on the investing side and working with them? Because if they can attract that, they probably can attract customers, and they'll be adaptive to changes in what the customers are telling them. We do look at what the product is, what traction they've gotten, what kind of protection they have, and are they capital efficient. But generally, a lot of it we're looking at just have they been able to pull together a good team of investors, advisors, and employees.
Those are some good insights. Have they built their own inner circle well enough so that way they have good judgment, and then the rest of it will work itself out? And so you mentioned that, earlier on, that you have that podcast, and so can you plug that podcast real quick in the middle part here, and also tell us like is there a good like jumping off point, or is there a favorite episode of this podcast?
Well, it's called Tech Optimist. Available at all your local. I do. It's down to about 10% of the ones I'm interviewing, and other people in the organization just interview people that they have contacts with. We've become a very large organization, and it's most of it is interviews of founders that we've invested in. Every once in a while, we'll throw in we'll talk about three major topics that are going on in the world and how that's going to impact companies. And we're always thinking about, well, the NCAA is going to start paying their athletes. This instead of they've been doing NIL, but now they're going to do revenue share. That's a major disruption of a multi-billion-dollar organization that isn't typically the tech world, but there are going to be opportunities created by that. So what are those opportunities, and where should we be looking? And a lot of our job is thinking like entrepreneurs to know where the puck's going as opposed to where it is. I think uh, as my 97-year-old mother asked me about 2 years ago, so are you investing in this artificial intelligence stuff? I said, well, Mom, if you know about an industry, I probably should have invested 5 years ago. But yes, we are.
Nice. And so as far as like about this podcast, I like how you mentioned about kind of, I don't even know what to describe it. It's like the magic of podcasting, right? The randomness. You say, well, I'm a venture capitalist firm, and we could be really limited in our thinking and just talk about like how to do it, or just limit ourselves to our companies. But you're saying we're expanding the scope, right? We're talking about all these other things that interest us, that kind of capture the new audience that maybe otherwise wouldn't have known about us. And with podcasting, people always psych themselves out, don't they? They say, oh, there's podcasts already, can I find the time for it? What's cool about it is it shows off your company and kind of establishes you as a thought leader. And so what are your thoughts about this podcast that your company's doing, and especially keeping the enthusiasm alive and staying just motivated and excited about it?
Well, um, for some people, Joe Rogan is a controversial topic, but if you listen to him, and people always ask him, you do a 2.5, 3 hour podcast 3 or 4 times a week. Well, you've done 2,000 of them, or I think he's approaching 3,000. Why? And he's like, I'm just having conversations with people I think are interesting. And we have, as I mentioned earlier, we have so many founders that are fascinating people, or they're either doing fascinating things or they're fascinating people. And the goal is really just to have a conversation with them. I think people are interested in new technologies, new ideas, and hearing from, if you're a startup founder, hearing from other founders that are down the path. And it's, if we had a bunch of canned questions and followed a script, I think it would be extraordinarily boring and no one would care. It's possible no one does care. But we are getting some following and people are listening. The podcast somewhat started out of a couple of years ago. I said, hey, I'm just going to start interviewing founders and throw it up on LinkedIn. And the first one I did was a guy that they're building they've gone through their first stage clinical trial. They have great data on a functional cure for HIV. And his assistant said, well, what questions are you going to ask? I said, well, I don't want it to be more than 45 minutes. So I'm going to ask Jeff one question and then I'll stop him after 45 minutes and she laughed and she said, okay, you've talked to Jeff. And that's pretty much how the podcast went, and I just threw it up on LinkedIn and 1,200 people watched it. Okay, people do care about this. And I did a few more. And eventually the organization said, we should release this as podcasts. And we had everybody else in my position start talking to their interesting founders. And one I just released is a person we've invested in twice in the last 5 years. He's on his second company that we've invested in. And the podcast that was released the next day or 2 days later was an interview of a founder that we invested in because this 2-time founder introduced us. He's right at the nexus of some really interesting companies that have absolutely nothing to do with what he's doing. In fact, the 2 companies we invested in are not related whatsoever, but he's just really good at great ideas. And then he knew enough to get out when it was time and bring someone in who knew how to take the company to the next level. So the first company is doing really well, and now he's probably onto a multi-billion-dollar idea that is just getting started. Again,
very cool. And
they're tremendously boring stuff. He's making surfactants Do you have any idea what a surfactant is?
I wouldn't even know how to guess what a surfactant is.
So surfactants are in almost every one of your household products, your shampoo, your soaps, your dishwashing. It's a currently petroleum based product that just helps with the keeping the solution active. And he's building them out of basically brewing yeast. And so it's more sustainable. And actually, the surfactant works better and is cheaper.
Very cool. So and you mentioned this idea a few times, just this thing it's boring on the surface and it's everywhere. We take it for granted, like you mentioned earlier about like the infrastructure. But then once you do the Joe Rogan of it and you dive in, you can extract the interesting parts of it. It's like, and we've all been there, right? We've all had some weird random class at school or watched some documentary or read some article, and you're thinking like, why am I reading this article? It's nothing to do with my background and my profession, but like it can just kind of it tickles the some like creativity area in the brain. And so in your podcasting journey, you mentioned a couple of cool lessons too, right? There's the lesson of like it strengthens your existing relationships or kind of keeps you and them on each other's radar for these future deals. And you've also mentioned about how like a few connections away, it might get a conversation going that otherwise it wouldn't have had. And there's also like the personality calibration. Like you remind me, like the other day, I had a podcast exactly what like you mentioned. I asked one question, and the guy just like had so much to say. But you and I, I'm sure, have also had conversations where you kept having to like dig through and have the questions, and other times when it was more natural. And it's just like how people are, right? You different people, you have these different kind of conversations. And so I'm curious about the surprises that have come your way, either in the podcasting or in the venture capitaling. Like, what is really noteworthy as far as what made you like change your thinking or change your trajectory?
It's a great question. It, it, every day something drastically changes, and you just have to. I spend a lot of time thinking, what? Okay, this is happening. How do you take advantage of that? Every every change creates opportunities, and there's the classic everybody hates change. I love change because it creates um, opportunities for you to help other companies grow, help your company grow, um, just fill in the void, because minimize that change, or just rip everything apart and get it to change further. So, um, wow. I think one thing that was very surprising, 4 years ago, we all got locked in our offices or in our homes, and watching certain industries that we were invested in a company that was doing basically ride sharing for kids. They were more vetted Uber drivers. It was and to make parents feel better, and that COVID hits and people aren't going anywhere. Like, okay, this company's dead. And they actually transitioned and became like a small bus company for school districts, as just so you could have fewer kids in a space, and they've actually thrived because of it. So they took this drastic change that could have crushed them. And we watched other ride sharing and scooter companies fall apart, and Airbnb competitors, just the hospitality industry got crushed by all that. But this company, who should have been in this industry that was getting beaten up, found a way to make their business better. And it's just the the ability to flex of some of these entrepreneurs is just amazing.
That is inspiring, and it speaks to some of these sort of entrepreneurial personality factors that maybe not everyone has, and maybe not are not very natural, right? Like you mentioned earlier about going to where the puck will be and having that foresight. I mean, who 5 or 10 years ago would have thought like, oh, let's invest in all this AI stuff? And it takes a different kind of thinking and different kind of like courage and risk tolerance and all those things, and it ends up making for a very interesting story, right? You also mentioned earlier about how when someone does like a presentation or comes to you, you enjoy the story of it. And if you have this company that said, hey, we didn't give up and there was this drastic change that was out of our control and we changed and it made it work, I mean, that makes for an exciting podcast and exciting company history. And I want to make sure that we cover the bases and that we talk about what you want to talk about, what makes you look really good. So, to kind of cheat a little bit, is there a hidden question in our conversation? Is there something that you wish that I would ask you, but I just don't know to ask it?
No, I mean, it's I my general belief for growing my company is that we need to be out there doing interesting things. We need to be engaging and be able to react to just about anything. And I there's no hidden question. If people find what we're doing interesting, they're going to learn more about us. If they don't think we're interesting, they won't. And that's fine. I'm very comfortable with, if my customers are investors, and we take we're our minimum investment is $25,000 to get into a venture capital fund. Our venture capital fund was recently ranked in the top 20 for performance of all. We were ahead of Kleiner Perkins this year on one of the rankings. So we're doing really well. But venture capital is not for everybody. And you talked about risk, and the one thing that I was taught very early on when I took this job was always remember you can only lose 1x. So we'll make 25 investments in a fund, and you don't want to invest in a company that fails. But the reality is it's more important that you don't pass on the wonderful idea, because losing 1x, one of your 25 investments, you can't lose more than you originally put in. So that's losing 1x. But if 15 years ago someone convinced me that hitchhiking over the internet was a good idea, I probably wouldn't have thought it was a great idea, but if they would have, but I passed for another reason, and it didn't make 6,000 times my money from investing in the first stage of Uber, I really messed up there. That's the bigger mistake for me than investing in a company that just ultimately didn't make it. And if you invest in 20, 25 companies in a portfolio, you mitigate a lot of the risk. As long as you're not doing, just randomly shooting out at things, you should be able to build a nice return for your investors. And it's not as risky as people think it is.
Wonderful, and I love your abundance mindset here. And then it's yet again in one of the topics that's come up in our conversation. Like, well, if you if this deal doesn't work out, there's other deals. If this isn't a right fit, there's other fits. And so I think that's really helpful to think about, that there's all these opportunities available for us, and it definitely pays to be curious and to love learning and to just be grateful for the uncertainty and the adaptability and just these opportunities to learn more about this kind of thing. And so, you mentioned just now about like the investors and people like that. And so, how does somebody know if they are a good fit for you and your company? If someone's listening to this podcast and they say, okay, I have to go and check out Alumni Ventures, how do they know if they're somebody for you?
Well, if on the investing side, they probably are. If they're interested in investing in a fund that has potential to make money, we're doing pretty well. No, history is no guarantee of future success, but venture capital has done well year in and year out. So if you're an accredited investor and you're interested in learning more, Greg at av.vc, more than happy to talk to you. If you're a startup, if you're raising money, we'd also very happy to talk to you. Keep in mind, as I said earlier, we're going to say no 98% of the time, but it's not personal. It's just not the right fit at that particular time. We are a very diverse portfolio, so we will invest in almost any industry, but there has to be a VC leading the round, and that's pretty much it. So it keeps my day busy, but we're really open to talking to anybody on either side. So it's but that's part of the fun too. Our team does really well. I've raised 10 different funds in the organization, and I've never cold called anybody. The investors find out about us and reach out, and I probably talk to 3 or 4 people for every one that invests, because it's not the right investment for them at that time. But it is it's an interesting opportunity, and you get a lot of fun things to follow in one of our funds.
It sounds like it. Conversation starters at parties and much more. And so av.vc is that website. And then the Tech Optimist podcast is that techoptimist.vc.
It's just search Tech Optimist and you're, in Apple or Google, whatever, wherever you find your podcast, Spotify, etc. And, you said things to talk about at parties. I actually had an investor very early on that it's like, he started the call. Like, I don't think I'll be around for 10 years. I'm getting pretty old, but I've got these teenage grandkids and I want to invest in something. I'm going to invest in both of our names so that I have something to talk to them about that they'll find interesting. Said,
that's cool.
So there are different ways that people use that, and I think the podcast is another interesting tool to find interesting topics of conversation, we're talking to a company that's building a vaccine for cancer, and another company that has found a better way to treat cancer, instead of slapping you on a table and rotating this 100 multi-ton photon therapy machine. They put you in a seat and rotate you, and it actually gets better results. So I get to find out interesting things all the time, and we have a fusion energy company that's starting to make money making radioactive isotopes for medical purposes, on their way to making enough power to generate energy on a very renewable basis. Actually, the next stage for that company is they'll be able to deradiate fission waste, which we've always wondered. What do you fit? Nuclear fission is a very reliable energy source, but what do you do with the waste? This company will, in a few years, be able to deradiate it, and we don't have to worry about storing it.
That is amazing. That's some world-changing stuff, and it's also fun, and it also makes money. So it's like, what's even the downside? And so av.vc is that website to go to. And because it's the end of our show, end of our podcast episode, it's time to put you on the spot a little bit and ask for a fun quote or lesson that you can really leave us with and get us super excited. So what comes to mind as far as a quote or lesson?
Well, the lesson I kind of used with you can only lose 1x in the VC world. And then the quote I used earlier was, I believe, from Mr. Gretzky, that says, you skate to where the puck's going, not to where it is. And that worked out really well for him.
Right. So we can all take some of that advice, skate to where the puck is, and you can only lose 1x. So
where it's going, not where it is.
Oh, right. Yeah. See, even I didn't remind us. Skate to where the puck will be, not where it is right now.
Yep.
And the place where you should be skating to right now is av.vc. Go there, get educated, speak to Greg and his company and his team, and see if there's a good fit happening as far as America's largest venture firm for individual investors. That is Alumni Ventures, av.vc. And thank you very much, Greg, for stopping by and for just an amazing, very, very varied conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.